back to bringing Jesus back into focus. After 2,000 years, was made very blurry in the 4th century when Emperor Constantine went to war and killed in the name of Jesus at the Milvian Bridge battle so he could become emperor. And within about 50 years, the corrupt Jewish Christian leaders, because that's what they became, Jewish leaders, the Christian leaders of the original Christian community and spiritual way to enlightenment and to the other dimension of the heavenly spiritual world, where you live in your spiritual body, which is what Jesus taught, providing it's well and filled with love. Those Christian leaders converted Christians back into worshipping Jewish God Yahweh. The Jewish God Yahweh, as everyone knows, is not one God, but two Yahwehs. A violent, brutal, murdering, genocidal war God that the Jews call Yahweh One, because that's the only way you can talk about them. It's the same war god of the Romans' war god Mars, the Greeks' war god Ares, and the Egyptian war god Sekhmet, and they all are brutal, murdering, genocidal, thieving, lying maniacs. Now the Jews worshipped that god just like the Romans and the Greeks. The Jews were no different to any other murderers at the time who worshipped a stinking, filthy war god. Now they all had a god of peace and love as well, but the Romans had Pax, the Greeks had Irene, and the Egyptians had another calming god. Now they had separate temples because it's a different god, it's a different life force. If you're a child of Pax, you're a child of love. You're a child of making friends with your neighbours across the river there in that other country, the foreigners. Now the Jews had a similar god. In one of the instructions that the God of love gave them, this is not the war god Yahweh, this is another god. This is the second god that the Jews worshipped. And that God said, if a foreigner is amongst you, treat them as if they are Jewish and love them as yourself. So that's the God of love. Now that's the God that Jesus was interested in, the second God of the Jewish religion. He knew it was a dualistic religion. He knew they were lying. He knew it was just a complete fabrication. So the Jews actually were very deceitful, cunning, and lying. They decided to call these two completely opposite gods, light and dark, good and evil, by the one name. They called the loving God Yahweh. So Yahweh 2 and Yahweh 1. It's one body called Yahweh. That's the only monotheistic thing about the Jewish religion. Nothing else is monotheistic about it at all. And it's got two heads on it. It's a hybrid. It's a perverted God. Now Jesus cuts the warhead off completely. He only acknowledges the good prophets, as he would call them, the ones who are trying to lead the Jews towards be more loving and even treat other people as if they're Jewish. Well, that's a really breakthrough time, But Jesus went way beyond that. He went into the singularity of the divine love. He had what's called a spiritual awakening, a full spiritual awakening of the clear light mind, with no negative, adventitious filth or dirt in his mind. It was completely cleansed. And he then opened up and received a connection to the true heavenly spiritual world, the true heavenly life force or creator of that beautiful spiritual universe and world, where all children from earth who have been spiritually minded and filled with love have gone, and who knows where else they come from to go there, but that world exists, and Jesus realized it existed and was connected to the creative life force of that world, whom generally is called God. I say loving spiritual creator. Now, Buddha had the same experience of the clear light mind, and he called that world nirvana. Both Jesus and Buddha said it's a place beyond death. You don't die anymore, there's no suffering, and your mind is completely at rest and at peace because there is no violence in your mind anymore. No sin, no evil. That's the breakthrough. You realize your true identity is that you have a spiritual body. So I was in the Jewish Christian Catholic Church, but I left when I was 16 or 17 because I was teaching this lie, that the Jewish God Yahweh, which there's two gods, was the one God of Jesus, who is perfect love. Obviously Yahweh's not perfect love. And Jesus' description of this divine loving world and life force is that her love is like the sun that rises on the good and equally on the evil. Her love is like the rain that falls equally on the just and the unjust. She is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. Unless your love is as perfect as her love, you are not going to enter heaven. So we have to become children of love and peace on earth. So I'm a pacifist Christian from the original church. I'm one of the few remaining ones in the world. There are the Quakers, the Amish, the Syrian Christians, very small group of us now. But even they get a bit confused and think Yahweh is the same God of Jesus, which is a lie. There's only one Yahweh, Yahweh number 2 is similar to the loving spiritual creator. So everyone in the world has a spiritual body. Jesus taught that. And the idea is that we have to make our way from this world to a much better world. And he gives you the instructions on how to do it. So after I discovered that the Jewish Christians were still teaching this filth and slander, that the book of Revelations, which is the book of Daniel from the old Jewish religion, that's been put at the end of the gospel. So Jesus is now sandwiched between the stinking, filthy war god of the Jews at the end in Revelation, which is the book of Daniel, with the stinking war god Yahweh, and Satan coming on the cloud to murder and kill and cause disease, starvation. That's satanic. And someone said that's Jesus, and that's the God of Jesus. Well, that's got to be an apocalyptic Jew who wanted to destroy the Christian religion, destroy the connection to the loving Creator, and slander Jesus. And they've done it. And I've been to churches where they teach that filthy, stinking rubbish to children. It's shocking that these children are doing that, and they call themselves Christians. They're not, they're Jews. So they've got a cross there or whatever, but they're not Christians. They're not followers of Jesus. They don't even know him. But they've got charities, don't get me wrong. And I'm not saying they can't go to heaven either. If they follow Jesus, I'll get there. But I'm not a Jewish Christian. I never have been. I left that behind because that was rubbish. I only follow him and his words and Buddha's teachings as well. When I left the Jewish Christian Catholic Church, I went across to the Buddhist monks because I knew Buddha was a pacifist. I wanted to know more about him because Jesus was a pacifist. Then that was destroyed. But so I'm what you might call just a follower of Jesus of Nazareth, and I also love Buddha's teachings because they both said you've got to clean your mind out. Or Jesus said you've got to clean the inside of the cup out. The dirt inside the cup is the problem. And if you clean it out, Jesus said, your mind will become single, or your eye will become single. You'll see everything through the eye of love. And he said, your body will be filled with light. That's the enlightenment. You're filled only with love for everyone on earth, even though there are evil satanic children warmongers prowling around murdering and slaughtering because they've shifted into a false identity. But we have to try to love them out of that because they're going into a hellish experience when they die. So I've written the Gospels Unplugged. I've removed all the poisonous apocalyptic overlay lies that have been put on top of Jesus. They're all lies. Matthew's Gospel is the worst. Either Matthew did it himself as an apocalyptic Jew. He could have even written the book of Revelations. Or someone's overwritten Matthew and also written the book of Revelations to put a paper trail leading to that stinking, filthy, slanderous book. So I advise all Christians to cut the Bible in two to start with and get rid of the Jewish religion out of all the churches, stick it up on the shelf with all the other religions. We're not Jews. And then rip out the book of Revelation and burn it, because that's the only thing that's useful to do, is to start a fire with it. So keep yourself warm. There's no other use of those papers. So, and then stick with Jesus' words. So these Gospels provide a simple translation or more direct translation of what he's saying. And I hope and pray that it is useful to children who have left the Jewish Christian churches because of the poisoning of the Jewish religion. And yet they love him. And they think God is sort of loving like him. But then God also, and he's come back with God to throw bad children into hell, something, or children who don't believe in him. So it causes schizophrenia. And I've met people whose minds have been really messed up by these Jewish Christians. So I'm here to tell you Jesus is fine, he's like Buddha, but he's nothing to do with Yahweh or the Jewish God. There is a Yahweh of love there, okay, he acknowledges that one, but it's not the universal loving creator of the spiritual universe and spiritual world. Everyone has a spiritual body. We can all go there. This book's available now, March 2026 around the world, and I'll be reading from that now. If you freeze the frame, you can read the back dialogue there, but it basically says that Jesus teaches everyone has a spiritual body. You have to keep it clean and healthy and well. All flesh dies and rots, and it doesn't come back from the dirt like the Jewish Christians try to lie to you about. You leave in your spiritual body. That's the one Jesus said you must get ready. And you get ready by loving others. Love, compassion, forgiveness, non-violence, equanimity. Reach out and help those who have fallen down. Generosity. Don't worship money. Don't be attached to the material world. Don't even be attached to your physical body. So his instructions are very spiritual and almost parallel Buddha's instructions. They both knew how to leave this dangerous world of suffering and go to a much more beautiful world. I'm trying to go there and prepare myself to get ready to go there by living out of the teachings of Jesus, and I hope everyone else, certainly Buddha and Jesus are two of the best, But anyone who talks about love and non-violence, they're at least on the right track. So that's the book there. And we're up to Jesus is Crucified. This is a chapter on Matthew. On Matthew. They're the contents of the book, so they're the chapters. So we're up to Matthew, and it's, as I say, I've tried to clarify, clear, remove lies, remove distorted Greek translations. I've used a much more accurate translation for what he was saying, because his words are fantastic, and I've always loved his words, and I've never bothered about the Jewish religion or the book of Revelation, so I'm sort of in an unusual position. So many people have been poisoned by the Jewish religion and the Christian faith that they're just Jewish. Let them have their two-headed God, that's their problem. If they don't want to get out of it, that's their problem. But we are not, we don't worship Yahweh, that's their Jew God. We worship the divine, loving, spiritual creator that Jesus was at one with, whose entire consciousness and being is only love. So you and I have to become children of only love, pacifists in a dangerous world. That's the challenge. But I'm up to it. I'm happy to do it. I'm not joining any stinking army, navy or air force. They're all satanic. So I just stay on the path to heaven through this dangerous world and try to be a light in the darkness. That's what Jesus said to do. I'm happy to do it. Jesus is crucified. This is where he lets his body of flesh die, and because he had another spiritual body that was fully awakened, and he left in the beautiful spiritual body that was perfect. He did not leave in a body of dead flesh. What he said in the Gospels, all dead flesh, feed it to the vultures. There's no life in it anymore. And he also said in that same reading in the Gospels, about two in a single bed, one is taken to be near to our loving spiritual creator. The spiritual body leaves, the body of flesh is sent forth, redundant, dismissed, of no use anymore. So we'll read on there. Jesus is crucified. So he's showing the disciples the two bodies. This is what the crucifixion's all about. He knows he's got a spiritual body. He's fully awakened like Buddha. He knows he's not going to die. He's got another body that's going to leave. But the disciples don't understand it because they're Jewish. And the Jews had no idea about this. They were still in the dark ages of spirituality. So Jesus is crucified. Matthew 27:32-61. And as Jesus carried his cross, a great number of people followed him, some crying, and the soldiers forced an onlooker, Simon of Cyrene, to help carry the cross. And when they came to the place called Golgotha, they offered him vinegar mixed with myrrh, but he refused it. There they crucified him with two others. They divided his garments among them, casting lots for them, and sat down and kept watch. And over his head they put the charge against him, which read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Standing near to the cross were his mother and his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing near, he said to his mother, Woman, behold your son. Then he said to the disciple, Behold your mother. And from that hour the disciple took her to his own home to care for her. Jesus then said, Loving spiritual creator, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads, saying, You said you would destroy the temple and build it again. If you are the anointed one of God, save yourself and come down from the cross. And the chief priests and scribes mocked him, saying, He saved others, but he cannot save himself. If he comes down from the cross, we will believe in him. He trusted in God, so let God deliver him now, for he said he was the anointed one. One of the criminals crucified beside Jesus complained to him, saying, Aren't you the anointed one? Save yourself and us. But the other criminal rebuked him, saying, Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of judgment? For we justly deserve this result for our bad deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong. And he said, Jesus, please remember me when you come into your spiritual kingdom. And Jesus said to him, Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in the heavenly spiritual world. Jesus rose that day in his spirit, not 3 days later. That's a lie. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me? The physical pain was overwhelming him. After this, Jesus, knowing that his physical body was about to die, said, I thirst. And one of them standing by took a sponge, dipped it in vinegar, put it on a reed and held it to his mouth. After Jesus received the vinegar, he cried out, It is finished. My loving Creator, into your hands I commit my spirit. And having said this, he breathed his last breath. You see, it's his spirit that left. His dead body of flesh, there was nothing in it anymore. The disciples actually had to hide it. The centurion standing nearby witnessing the death of Jesus said, "Truly this was a righteous man." And many of his followers, including the women who had followed him, stood off at a distance and saw these things take place. As it was preparation day for the Sabbath, and to prevent the bodies remaining on the cross on the Sabbath, the Jews asked Pilate to break their legs to hasten their death, so they may be taken down. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the two criminals beside Jesus. But when they came to Jesus, his body was already dead, so they did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once blood and water flowed out. Jesus is buried. As evening came, a man named Joseph of Arimathea, a disciple of Jesus, in secret, as he was a member of the Jewish council, went to Pilate. He asked Pilate if he could take the body of Jesus for burial, so Pilate ordered it to be given to him. Joseph, with help from Nicodemus, who also listened to Jesus teach, gathered 100 pounds of myrrh and aloes and came to get the body of Jesus from the cross. They took it down and wrapped it in a clean linen shroud with the spices they had brought, and they quickly laid it in Joseph's own tomb that he had recently prepared, as it was nearby and the day of preparation was ending. Then they rolled the stone against the door and left. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where they laid him. Author. The account in Matthew about Pilate placing a Roman guard on the tomb is false and never happened. It was contrived by Matthew to help cover up the truth that Jesus actually rose and appeared to the disciples in his full spiritual body, and not his dead body of flesh brought back to life. They had to do this as the Jews were not spiritually advanced enough to understand this spiritual truth that Jesus taught about us all having two different bodies with us right now. One of flesh that dies and is food for the vultures, and one of spirit that leaves to be near our loving spiritual Creator in the heavenly spiritual world. If you're ready to go in there, that is. Everyone reaps what they sow after death. So they had to hide his dead body of flesh so the Jews could not find it and accuse them of lying about seeing Jesus alive and well. And they had to leave the tomb empty as if Jesus came back to life in his body of dead flesh and went to heaven. They could then honestly say they saw Jesus alive and well, but pretend he was in a body of flesh brought back to life. The Jews already had in their scriptures accounts of some prophets being taken up to heaven while still alive. So this would aid in their deception, being believed by the Jews, so they would not be afraid to follow the new spiritual way of Jesus and our loving spiritual Creator, and come away from the two-headed God Yahweh of the Jews. See, the disciples had a dilemma. They found his dead body there, probably Friday night. He appeared to them most likely Friday night in the room with Thomas. And they didn't recognize him. They thought he was a ghost, which he was a spiritual being. He briefly said a few things to them and then he disappeared. Most likely Peter and John with Mary Magdalene went to the tomb, found his dead body still there. They would have unwrapped the shroud to make sure it was Jesus, make sure it was the right tomb. They needed Mary to show them. And then they had this great dilemma. He visited them in his spiritual body, and then he went to heaven. He went to the spiritual world, which anyone can go there. You can go there, I can go there after death. If you're ready, if you lived a life of peace and love here, you can go there. You'll be safe. And so they had a problem. And on the spur of the moment, or just to understand how they could possibly save his teachings, they hid his physical body of flesh. If they left it there and the Jews found it, and the disciples were saying, "We saw him, he spoke to us, he was well, he was in this sort of spiritual body," well, the Jews wouldn't have, they would have found his dead body of flesh and said, "You're all lying." And everyone would have known, that, and then they would have left the disciples, and all these wonderful teachings and parables could have been lost from history. So that's why they did it. Jesus rises in spirit, Matthew 28:5-10. On the day after the Sabbath, Mary Magdalene came to where they had laid Jesus in the tomb and saw the tomb had been rolled away. The stone had been rolled away. And when she looked in the tomb, it was empty. So she ran back to Simon Peter and the other disciple whom Jesus loved, said to them, They have taken the Master's body out of the tomb, and I do not know where they have taken him." Peter then went with the other disciple towards the tomb. The disciple who reached the tomb first looked in and saw the linen cloths lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter came after him and went into the tomb and saw the linen cloths lying there, and the towel which had been over his head, rolled up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple at the entrance also entered in and saw the same thing as Peter. And they had forgotten, Jesus said to them, that he will rise in spirit from the dead. And the disciples went back home. Mary stood outside the tomb weeping, and she stooped down and looked in the tomb. She saw two angels in white sitting there where the body of Jesus had lain, one at the head and one at the feet. And they said to her, "Woman, why do you weep? Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is risen in spirit and is not here." She said to them, "But I do not know where he has been taken and where he now is." After saying this, she turned round and saw Jesus, but did not recognize him. Jesus then said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom do you seek?" Mary thought he was the gardener and said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him back." Jesus then called her by name, "Mary." She then turned and recognized Jesus, and she said, "Teacher." Jesus said to her, "Do not try to hold me, Mary, for I am now in the Spirit, and I am at one with our loving spiritual Creator." He wasn't in a body of flesh anymore. That's why he told her, "Don't try to hold on to this body. It's a spiritual body. You can't hold it anymore. It's not flesh and blood. But go and tell my followers you have seen me, and I have ascended into spirit with my loving spiritual Creator and your loving spiritual Creator." We all have a spiritual body. Whether yours is awake or mine's awake depends on how much love you have in your life. Mary then went and told the disciples that she had seen the Master alive and all that he had said to her. Now, I've put this in as the best traditional account. There are others though, and I explained in the Gospels of the teachings of Jesus Unplugged what probably happened. Mary Magdalene in this account only went and told John and Peter. It's my belief John and Peter and Mary Magdalene actually went to the tomb Friday night, the three of them. They needed Mary to show them the tomb. And then they orchestrated this nobody in the tomb business. Mary had to find the tomb. If the disciples said they found it, then the Jews would have another, much easier road to say, "Oh, you hid his body." If you're saying you found the tomb and he wasn't there, you must have gone there and taken it away. So they used Mary Magdalene to be the one to find the tomb, so they wouldn't be involved in supposedly finding it. But they'd already been there and they hid the body. They had to. Also, the Gospels have different accounts about the resurrection sequences and the people involved. The main points that seem consistent and logical with what really happened are that Mary Magdalene found the tomb open on Sunday morning and the dead body of Jesus was missing. She went and only told Peter and John. Jesus appeared to Mary in his spiritual body, not his dead body of flesh brought back to life. We know this fact to be true because John gives us the strongest clue and records that Jesus told Mary she could no longer hold on to him anymore like she did when he had a body of flesh. John's leaving that very powerful clue for anyone who's got any logical sense at all, and you look at Jesus' teachings and understand what he's saying. He was in a spiritual body. She couldn't hold him anymore. The other clues are that they didn't easily recognize him when he appeared to them after death, because he was now only in his spiritual body, which must appear similar but different to us here on earth. And he can now just materialize and disappear at will, like angels, who also have spiritual bodies, just as Jesus said we will all have if we enter the heavenly spiritual world. He now had a perfect spiritual body, not one with wounds on it. That's all made up. They had to sell the product, you might say. The Jews weren't ready to hear that you've got a spiritual body and they saw Jesus in a spiritual body. They had no belief in that. Spirits belong in Sheol, in the dark underworld. They wouldn't want to follow a spiritual being who's appeared to the disciples on the earth, on the surface of the earth. They're frightened of spiritual ghosts on earth. So that's what was the problem, you see, the historical context. They had to say his body of flesh rose. They covered it up. He had a spiritual body, so do you, so do I. That's what's going to leave. It's better to think that way. It makes it much more powerful, and it's much easier to follow his pacifist teaching if you believe that, because that's what he taught anyway. The Jews had no understanding of this and would have been frightened to follow a spirit that had left Sheol a shadowy underworld where they believed all souls went after death, and who was now walking around amongst them. So based on the clues, particularly in John's Gospel, we can rightly speculate that Peter and John, with Mary, showing them the way, went to the tomb after Jesus appeared to the disciples briefly in his spiritual body, probably Friday night after the crucifixion. There they rolled back the stone door, unwrapped the bandages to make certain it was Jesus, and found his dead body was still there. They then realized the deeper meaning of all the teachings he had given them to help them understand the spiritual truth about our two different bodies in one that we have on earth right now. You and I have two bodies right now. Just as Jesus did, he left in only one of them, but it was fully alive and it was filled with the loving spiritual life force from heaven, so he could go to heaven. And we have to be the same. Don't join armies and the satanic armies that are killing children. Don't hurt anyone. Become a spiritual child of love, and you'll go there after death. You won't die. But we'll go through the death experience. I'm not saying that won't happen. That could be agonizing. But it all stops once this piece of meat in the middle of this biological organism called the human body, once that stops moving, you won't feel any more pain or suffering from the body. But if you're spiritually alive and filled with love through your life here on earth, you will actually be there in your spiritual body. You'll be alive and full of love, so you'll be able to enter the other dimension. So Jesus literally manifested this at the time of his death by appearing to them briefly in only his spiritual body, now set free from the dead body of flesh, before he went to the heavenly spiritual world. This separation of our two different bodies is exactly what happens at death, as Jesus himself taught. The dead body of flesh, including his, is just food for the vultures and has no life in it anymore. He says this in the Gospels. Jewish Christians don't want you to look at that. They don't talk about that. They cover it over. They lie. But the spiritual body rises from the dead body of flesh to be taken to be near to our loving spiritual Creator in the heavenly spiritual world, if we are awakened spiritual children of love on earth. Jesus was always saying, get ready to leave in your spiritual body, but it's only filled with love. It's only empowered by a loving spiritual life force, not potatoes, beans and pumpkins. That's all back there on the ground rotting. Jesus was an awakened spiritual child of our loving spiritual Creator, and before going to heaven, he provided a brief and powerful demonstration for the disciples of being alive and well in his spiritual body, while his body of flesh was dead, no life in it. They had to hide it. Then they had a very difficult problem. If they said they saw Jesus and he was alive and well and spoke to them, the Jewish leaders would just go to his tomb and find his decaying body of flesh and then accuse the disciples of all being charlatans and liars. This could cause everyone to leave them and the beautiful spiritual way of love and non-violence that Jesus gave us to reach the heavenly spiritual world, and it could have died out and been lost. So I believe Peter and John, with Mary's involvement, hid the dead body of Jesus and left the tomb open and empty, so that they could say he rose in his body of flesh, which was not unheard of in the Jewish scriptures. So they didn't want to frighten the Jews away. This could make Jesus more acceptable to the Jews, and they may be more willing to leave their two-headed God, Yahweh, and follow his spiritual way of love and non-violence of our loving spiritual Creator, who is only love. That's the true source of heaven. If you want to get to heaven, you have to be with this God, this divine spiritual being, and her consciousness of love has to be your consciousness as her child of love on earth. Otherwise you can't go there. This meant they had to invent cover-up stories as red herrings to convince everyone Jesus had a body of flesh that rose from the dead and not a true, living, spiritual body only. So they fabricated different little scenarios, such as Jesus eating some fish or still having wounds on his body, or even going so far as to have Jesus himself saying, he is not a spiritual body, but I have a body of flesh and bones. It's so contrived, it's just like a sore thumb, you know. But amongst these red herrings, they also left the clues to the spiritual truth, which at those times the Jews were not ready to understand, believe and follow. But now we are ready to see Jesus more clearly, as he intended, and we must remove these Jewish overlays to reveal the simple spiritual truth that Jesus taught. Flesh only gives birth to flesh. It can't create a spiritual body. Spirit only gives birth to spirit. Marvel not that I tell you, you must be born again from above. Further discussion about this topic can be found in the book, The Teachings of Jesus Unplugged. Jesus is saying your spiritual body has to come alive, be born again from above. That is the spiritual loving life force from heaven that empowers your spiritual body now, and after your body of flesh dies, it will still be alive if you are filled with the loving spiritual life force that comes forth from this loving divine spiritual creator in this spiritual universe and spiritual world. It's a different dimension. Now that's what he's saying, and it's true. I believe it. And I'm trying to make sure I'm in my primary spiritual identity all the time and thinking about through love, seeing everyone through the eye of love. And everyone is loving to some degree, but we've got to move into it fully. That's the only way we're going to stop these horrific satanic children ruling the world at the moment. And we have to become the opposite, pacifists. They're all poisoning their children, poisoning their minds with these evil, stinking, filthy thoughts. They teach them how to kill other children. These are all satanic people, these armies and generals and navies and air forces. They all are satanic, false, lying identities. Because a spiritual child who's on the way to heaven, here on earth, if you wake up to be a spiritual committed child and you're spiritual primarily, you can't hurt anyone, because no one can hurt anyone in heaven. And if you do hurt people here, you won't get into heaven. It's that simple. You'll suffer. So that's the beautiful dialogue. It's just fantastic. That's actually what happened at the resurrection, so to speak. And I'll leave it there. And I'm not sure how many more I've got here. There's a few. Yeah, there's a few. We'll move on to the other resurrections on the next episode. So this is important to understand this. It is Mary. There's one account in John's Gospel, you see. John wrote the more correct account. Mary, after she discovers the tomb empty, which was already staged, they'd already taken the body out, and Mary had to be there because John and Peter had to get Mary to show them where the tomb was because she saw where they buried Jesus. So they go with Mary. Mary knows that Jesus' body of dead flesh is there, but they've seen him in his spiritual body. She knows that. So together the three of them. And in John's Gospel, Mary only goes and tells Peter and John, not the other disciples. John's account's accurate. She goes down, oh, surprise, surprise, the tomb's empty. Oh, shock, horror. I was there when they carried his body out. She then goes and gets Peter and John, right, I've been down to the tomb. I can say I saw it empty. The stones still rolled back the way he did it last night, sort of thing, or 2 nights ago. And then Peter and John come to the tomb. They go down and they say, oh, Mary found it open. We didn't know. Mary told us. So they're a bit further away from the truth that they actually were there. They rolled the stone back and they did hide the body. That's true. And in fact, that saying's even again, I think in Matthew as well or something, that and the story was spread that the disciples hid the body, and even to this day, that lie is still being spread. They've actually, put in this extraordinarily blunt sort of obvious, contrived lie to cover up the actual fact. They did bury his body. I mean, they did hide it. So the disciples went to great lengths in their writings to try to cover up the truth that Jesus had a perfect spiritual body, and we all have one with us now to live in, providing it's alive and well and not covered in layers of murder and filth and darkness. Then you'll be sorry after you die. So we can only pray for the satanic armies of the world, all those satanic children who are murdering and killing and flying drones and bombs. They're all going to be in a horrific suffering of beyond anything they can imagine after they die, by themselves, alone. So Jesus rose in a beautiful spiritual body. He appeared to them in a beautiful, perfect spiritual body. How could an angel's body have wounds in it? I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all. It's not even logical. He shows them his hands and his feet as if he's got wounds in them to prove it's him. He says, you have a perfect body like an angel in heaven. Does that mean when we go to heaven, we still got a lame leg and we're hobbling around? Or does it mean you've still got half your cheek missing from your cancer operation? I mean, it's ridiculous. But in those days it worked 2,000 years ago, but we don't need that now. We know about spiritual beliefs being far more real We know about other dimensions. Even scientists talk about it. Well, Jesus knew about another dimension, all right. So did Buddha. But it's what's generally termed a spiritual dimension. And it's in you now. Heaven's within you. Jesus said that. Where is heaven? It's within you. It's in your spiritual body. Because your spiritual body and your spiritual mind, most importantly, your mind, when it's cleared of all the adventitious, dualistic, hate and evil things, you only have a single mind of love. That's the mind of your spiritual body. That's the heavenly mind. That's the heavenly form it's in. It's all spiritual. And it's all empowered by only one thing. This loving spiritual life force, or New Age children would say energy or vibration, high vibration, terminations like it. But I say loving spiritual life force. To me that just seems more correct. It's a living spiritual life force, like blood flowing through our bodies of dirt and flesh and blood and bones. Without the blood circulating through it, the body has no life. The physical body of dirt and flesh, the earth body. Well, your spiritual body has no life in it unless the loving spiritual life force from heaven is flowing through it. It's a different body, different. I don't know what it looks like, what its form actually is. Could be still human form, I don't know. But it has to have the living spiritual life force flowing through it, just as our bodies of dirt and flesh has to have blood flowing through it, and water, pumpkins and beans. We actually dig potatoes out of the dirt and eat them. They're from the dirt into our body of dirt, because it's all material. The spirit, that won't nourish your spiritual body at all. You're only nourished by the loving spiritual life force, which you then express through the temporary physical body to other children while you have a little bit of time before you die. That means as it flows into your spiritual body from heaven, spirit is born from above, remember? So heaven's love comes into your spiritual body. You've already got some in you. Whether you've increased it or diminished it, that's where you are at this stage in your life's journey. For example, Putin and the Russian army and the Israeli army and Netanyahu and Hamas and Iran, and Ukraine, they've got almost no spiritual life in their spiritual body anymore. They've only got a small, tiny drop of light there from heaven because they've covered themselves in murder and death and death and death and death. So they're in the pitch black darkness of filth and hell. They don't know it yet until the spiritual body leaves. Then they're covered in this immense darkness. And then they start experiencing all the little children they've murdered and killed and crushed and blown their legs off and brains out of their heads. That's going to be their experience that child had. And Putin will experience it, and Netanyahu and the Israeli army and the Russian army and Hamas and Iran and Ukraine. They're all going to experience those deaths of the others that they caused, because that's what happens. That's reaping what you sow. Now that's a very direct interpretation, but there's no problem at all why this beautiful spiritual being who's connected to every child on earth can't just simply plant in you or me the experience of the other child that you killed or I killed or murdered. Their suffering, their fear, their horror, their agony, their torture. There's nothing to stop the loving Creator just simply going, well, you caused this. Here you go. It's yours now. You made it. You created this for that child. You experience it now. That's what Buddha taught. That's what Jesus taught. The law of karma. With what measure you give, you will receive. So that's why we don't have to kill these satanic children. They're heading for hell anyway. Keep on course to heaven. Demonstrate against them in peace marches. Demonstrate against the armaments industry and all the satanic children who work in the armaments industry. They are all satanic children, all of them. The governments that run the satanic armaments industries and the governments themselves that are satanic that buy the weapons, they're all satanic. It's just the way it is. It's a tragic thing to think that's normal, but this is a really evil sort of world where these evil thoughts are in governments, and the governments say we're democratic, but they're not spiritual. So stay with your spiritual teacher like Jesus or Buddha. They're the two of the best. But there is love in the Quran, there's love in the Bhagavad Gita, there's love in the Sikh religion, the Baha'i faith, the Muslim faith, of course, in the Quran, and there's love in the Jewish religion, Yahweh, the loving one, that loving God. That's the loving aspect of their religion, not the violent murderer, the war God. So you can find bits of love everywhere. But Jesus and Buddha had the singularity, only love. That's why they were pacifists. So I am one of their followers. And that's why I talk about Jesus' teachings in this way, because they've been perverted, distorted, slandered, and they're lying about what he said. And I got a bit angry about that when I investigated it these last few years. I had no idea they were still doing this, and I had no idea the extent they were doing it. They were just Jews claiming to be Christians. They're just worshipping Yahweh, the two-headed God. They want Yahweh to come back and kill all the bad children. So only they'll be saved, of course. And if you're not a follower of Jesus, well, you've had it. You're not going to heaven. If you're a Buddhist, forget that. Or if you're a Muslim, well, you're not going. That's what they teach. They poison children's minds. They slander Jesus. They got no idea what he was teaching. But they got Christian charities. They got him there, the Christ charities. So that's the problem. They've mixed the new wine in with the old stinking wine. And the trouble is they've poisoned the wine. He said, don't do it. But they put it into the one wineskin, and that wineskin is called the Bible. 2 wines in one wineskin. Cut the Bible in 2, put the old stinking wine of the Jews up on the shelf. There is some love in it, but there's a brutal, murdering, satanic war god. Jesus said they were worshipping Satan. That's the war god. Stop it, he said. Then cut out the book of Revelation and simply burn it. Don't put that anywhere. That's the book of Daniel anyway. It doesn't belong with Jesus. It's the old wine. And then you're just left with Jesus' words and Gospels. And then you're going to have to buy a book like mine, or someone who's written a book like mine, who's removed the apocalyptic lies. And then also clarified the way he talks about love and non-violence and how you've got 2 bodies. You'll see it more clearly. Once someone like me, a Christian, just a Christian, not a Jewish Christian, so I'm not poisoned by the Jewish religion, I can see it quite clearly. I never realised how unusual that was. I took it for granted that everyone must have known that. But then I thought, oh, I just discovered, blimey. No wonder everyone's leaving the Jewish Christian churches. So that's the general story. I should be here perhaps while I'm rambling on. Sorry. The Gospels of Jesus Unplugged, 2nd edition. You've got to get the 2nd edition. The 1st edition, I didn't have the commentary running in it, and it was a different layout. And I had to get something out because I've been extremely ill physically, and my body of flesh has nearly died hundreds of times in the last 3 years from a deadly neurotoxic infection living in the body. That's from fungi and yeast from my gardening career. But unfortunately, it wasn't able to stop me from writing the books. Thank heavens. Because there's no doubt I was guided in from heaven to do this work, because I don't have to worry about being kicked out of any Jewish Christian church. I don't belong to anyone. I can go into any Christian, Jewish Christian church because Jesus is there, but I'm not interested in the Jewish rubbish that they teach about Jesus. I'm not saying the loving God of Yahweh is rubbish. I'm not saying that. That Yahweh of love is the correct God that the Jews should all be following, but they're not. They follow the war god most of the time. So, and they call both Yahweh, so that's the simple truth. Once you understand that, though, you can come back to Jesus. And if you study Buddha's teachings as well and Jesus side by side, you'll get a much more powerful sort of impact on your life. Buddha, of course, doesn't talk about a divine spiritual being or creator. He doesn't talk about that. But he does talk about nirvana, a world of no suffering. He does talk about the adventitious bad things in your mind, the negativities that are blocking your experience of the clear light mind. You've got to clean out your mind, he said. Well, that's exactly what Jesus said. It's not the dirt on the outside of your body of flesh that's the problem. That's not the dirty thing. It's the dirty things inside the cup. You've got to clean the inside of the cup out. Then your life will be a life of cleanness, honesty and goodness. They both taught the same thing. They both had the same realization. 400 years apart, different cultures. But Jesus knew the Jews were worshipping 2 different gods, and he knew they were lying about it. That's why they killed him. They didn't like that truth being exposed. And you got to remember, a lot of children were following Jesus. They were leaving the 2-God Yahweh, the 2-headed God Yahweh, and they were being drawn towards his God of only love, the loving spiritual creator, and heaven. You can't get into heaven if you're worshipping a war god. You're not getting in. Or if you're doing the actions of the war god, You might innocently be worshipping the war god without knowing it, like the Jewish Christians do. But it's sort of an innocent thing. They're so brainwashed. But it is interesting how they don't look at his words. They ignore them, which, of course, reminds me of his famous saying, even when he was alive, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, Lord? We love you, Lord." But you don't listen to the words. You don't follow the words I'm giving you. You don't do what I say. Why are you praising me and, oh, you love me, but you don't do what I tell you to do. He was even having trouble when he was alive. Well, now boy, 1700 years later, I'm one of the few voices speaking the truth on YouTube. But I'm happy to do it because it's the truth. He's only love and non-violence. He said to Philip, if you see me, Philip, you'll see God. Love and non-violence. He even describes this beautiful loving world and loving life force that sustains that world. Her love is like the sun that rises on the good and the evil, like the rain that falls on the just and the unjust. She is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. Unless your love is as perfect as this, you're not entering her world. I'll leave you with that. It's a challenge, but do it. Become love. Don't be like the bloody, sheep that are just misled into any sort of poisonous, stinking thoughts and become satanic. Hate and kill, murder, wars, armies. They're all satanic. So don't go there. Join the Amish. Wish the Amish were here in Australia. I'd go and join them. Get my straw hat and the horse and cart. Throw the mobile phone TV out. Beautiful. Love your way to heaven. You can do it if you want to. It's your choice. And I'll see you there, hopefully. Or hate your way to hell. Like all the armies in the world at the moment. We can't stop them. It's their free will to go to hell. Wish they'd stop. That's all we can say. Pray for their souls after they die. Unless they put down their guns and stop. They are dedicated satanic worshippers. So anyway, it's hard to stop them. Only death will put an end to their reign of terror. And we can't cause it though. We have to try to help them. Love your way to heaven. Bye for now.